Emily Hartley, a beloved philanthropist and pregnant mother, vanished without a trace one fateful night, leaving her billionaire husband Richard desperate for answers. As the search for Emily unfolded, secrets were unearthed, exposing a web of betrayal involving a cunning mistress, Ava Daniels, whose dark ambitions would turn a tragic disappearance into a chilling tale of murder, greed, and manipulation. What began as a missing persons case soon spiraled into a shocking revelation, one that no one saw coming. Emily Hartley, a well-known philanthropist and socialite, had everything anyone could wish for: beauty, wealth, and a loving family. Pregnant with her second child, she had been the epitome of happiness and grace, always seen at charity events. Smiling alongside her billionaire husband Richard Hartley, their marriage seemed perfect, a union admired by everyone who knew them. However, one evening in early spring, everything changed. Emily disappeared without a trace. It was an ordinary night, or so it seemed. Richard had been away on a business trip, and Emily was at home alone, just days away from her due date. When he returned, the house was eerily quiet, and Emily was nowhere to be found. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken windows, and nothing out of place. The only thing missing was her, along with her phone, purse, and keys. Richard immediately contacted the authorities, but despite their best efforts, no leads emerged. Police scoured the area, interviewed neighbors, and traced her last known whereabouts, but there was no sign of Emily. In the media, speculation began to grow. Did she leave on her own? Had something sinister happened? Richard's frantic appeals for help were broadcasted worldwide, his anguish clear for all to see. But questions began to surface. Was he truly as distraught as he appeared, or was there something more to his story? As days turned into weeks, Emily's disappearance became a public sensation. Her family, friends, and the entire city were consumed by the mystery. Every corner seemed to hold a clue, yet nothing made sense. Where could Emily be? And why? Had she vanished so suddenly? The questions remained unanswered, casting a shadow of uncertainty over Richard's once perfect life. As the days passed with no sign of Emily, Richard Hartley's life, once pristine and admired, began to unravel. The media, who had once celebrated his success, turned on him with increasing scrutiny. The world watched as he made desperate public pleas, claiming to be beside himself with worry. But his every word was now analyzed and dissected. Was he genuinely grieving? Or was there something more to his performance? Friends and colleagues described Richard as a driven, meticulous businessman, but as the investigation into Emily's disappearance deepened, doubts started to grow about his role in it. Richard's alibi for the night Emily vanished was solid. On the surface, he had been in another city, conducting business. Yet, something didn't sit right with the authorities. A private investigator hired by Emily's family uncovered a few small, peculiar details. Richard's flight home had been delayed, but he had not called to check in on his wife during the extra hours he spent waiting. In fact, no one could recall him even reaching out to her the entire day after he arrived back. He claimed to have been busy, but this inconsistency raised a red flag. The media speculated wildly. Some wondered if Richard had been hiding an affair. Others questioned his wealth, suggesting that Emily might have uncovered a dark secret within the Hartley fortune, perhaps a financial scandal, or worse, a criminal activity that Richard wanted to keep hidden. Emily's mother, distraught by her daughter's sudden disappearance, even hinted that Emily had been anxious in the days before she went missing, possibly due to a secret Richard was keeping. The questions swirled around Richard's every move. Was he hiding the truth about his wife's disappearance, or was he merely the victim of a horrible situation? As the investigation into Emily's disappearance progressed, a shocking revelation came to light. Richard Hartley had been having an affair. The news broke like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the media. For months, Richard had portrayed himself as a devoted husband, desperate to find his missing wife. But it now appeared there was a dark side to their seemingly perfect marriage. His mistress, Ava Daniels, was a familiar face in the social circles that Richard and Emily frequented. A striking woman in her early 30s, Ava had always been the picture of charm and sophistication, but now her name was tangled in a scandal that would change everything. Ava had been in Richard's life for years, and their relationship had been kept secret until now. She had been a frequent guest at high-profile events, but her role had always been overlooked, with many assuming she was just another socialite in the Hartley circle. However, as details emerged, it became clear that Ava had been more than just an acquaintance. She had been deeply involved with Richard for a long time. She was reported to have spent time at the Hartley mansion when Emily was away, and the two women were even said to have crossed paths on occasion, though no one suspected the affair. What stunned investigators more than the affair itself was the timing. It was discovered that Richard and Ava had been seeing each other for months. As the investigation into Emily's disappearance deepened, a startling connection between Ava and Emily began to surface. It was revealed that the two women, once close friends, shared a history that went back years. Before the affair, Emily and Ava had been inseparable, attending charity galas, traveling together, and confiding in one another about their personal lives. But beneath the surface of their friendship, a quiet tension had always existed. Emily, who had everything, was often unaware of the simmering resentment Ava harbored. Ava, though outwardly supportive, was secretly envious of Emily's perfect life, especially her marriage to Richard. Emily had always been the picture of grace and happiness, while Ava struggled with her own insecurities. Over time, their friendship began to deteriorate as Ava's jealousy grew. She watched from the sidelines as Emily's life seemed to unfold effortlessly, while her own felt stagnant. Ava's feelings of inadequacy festered, and her admiration for Emily shifted into something darker. She began to resent Emily's ability to maintain a perfect facade, especially her picture-perfect marriage to Richard. This jealousy grew into an obsession. Ava knew Richard was a powerful man with a fortune that could change her life, and she began to fantasize about a future where she, not Emily, was at his side. Emily had confided in Ava about her struggles with her pregnancy and her worries about Richard's long work hours and their strained intimacy. But what Emily didn't know was that Ava was using these intimate conversations to fuel her own desires. She had started to plot a way to take Emily's place, using her own relationship with Richard as leverage. The discovery of this secret, simmering jealousy painted a chilling picture of Ava's motives. It was becoming clear. Ava wasn't just the mistress, she was a key figure in a far more complex and dangerous situation. What had once been a friendship built on trust had twisted into something far darker, with deadly consequences. The breakthrough, in Emily's case, came when a local security camera captured a grainy image of a person leaving the Hartley mansion late at night, the night Emily vanished. The footage was unclear, but it was enough to stir up suspicion. The figure, shrouded in a dark hoodie, had their face obscured, making it impossible to identify them outright. But the movements of the person were deliberate and swift, as if they knew exactly where they were going and how to avoid being seen. The police quickly analyzed the footage, zooming in on the image as much as possible. With the timeline in place, investigators began to focus on people who had been near the Hartley property around that time. After digging through security records from neighboring homes, they began to suspect the person in the video was none other than Ava Daniels. There had been several sightings of her coming and going from the estate in the weeks leading up to Emily's disappearance, and her presence that night was now inescapable. As the evidence mounted, questions began to swirl around Ava's involvement. She had been seen leaving the house that evening, her movements matching the figure on the security footage. Was she simply visiting Richard, or did she have something more sinister in mind? The police learned that Ava had been near the mansion multiple times over the course of the investigation, but the timing of this particular visit was troubling. Could she have been involved in the disappearance? Ava's whereabouts for the night of Emily's disappearance became a key point of focus. When questioned, she offered a vague account of events, claiming that she had been at the house earlier in the evening but left before midnight. However, the timeline didn't match the security footage, and investigators began to feel more certain of her role in the case. It was clear Ava had been lying. But why? Did she play a part in what happened to Emily, or was she being framed? for something much darker than anyone could have imagined. As investigators dug deeper into Ava Daniels' life, they uncovered a shocking betrayal that made her role in Emily's disappearance even more suspicious. Ava's secret involvement with someone from Emily's past, a man named Daniel Mercer, began to emerge. Daniel was a figure who had been linked to Emily years earlier, long before her marriage to Richard. He was a former business associate of Richard's, someone Emily had trusted and even considered a friend. However, their relationship soured when Daniel was caught in a financial scandal, one that threatened to bring down several key players in Richard's world. What shocked the investigators was the revelation that Ava had been in regular contact with Daniel during the months leading up to Emily's disappearance. It turned out that the two had been working together on a plan that involved manipulating Richard into giving up control of a significant portion of his fortune. Daniel, who had his own grudges against Richard, was eager to regain his lost wealth and status, and Ava saw an opportunity to seize everything she wanted: Richard, his money, and the life she had always dreamed of. As the puzzle pieces fell into place, it became clear that Ava wasn't just an affair partner. She was an active participant in a much larger, more sinister plot. She had been feeding Richard false information about Emily's behavior, creating distrust between them. Ava knew about the tension in Richard and Emily's marriage and exploited it, hoping to destabilize their relationship further. With Daniel's help, she had carefully orchestrated a scheme that would push Richard to the edge, all while ensuring that Emily's disappearance would distract everyone from their manipulative game. This discovery turned the investigation on its head. Ava, once considered merely a jealous lover, was now seen as the mastermind behind a plot designed not only to harm Emily, but to ruin Richard and his empire. The authorities now had to determine if Ava had planned Emily's disappearance as part of her scheme, or if the situation had spiraled out of control. One thing was certain: Ava's role in the case was far darker than anyone had initially imagined. As the investigation unfolded, detectives uncovered startling details about the Hartley family's empire that painted a much darker picture of Richard and his business dealings. On the surface, the Hartley fortune seemed legitimate. Richard's success as a tech mogul and his philanthropic ventures had garnered him widespread admiration. But beneath the glossy exterior, there were cracks in the foundation of the family's wealth. The deeper the investigators dug, the more troubling the revelations became. It was discovered that Richard had been involved in several questionable financial dealings over the years, many of which he had hidden from his wife, Emily. A web of offshore accounts, undisclosed investments, and high-risk ventures painted a picture of a man who was willing to bend the rules to maintain his wealth and power. Emily had begun to suspect that something was amiss in Richard's business dealings, especially when her attempts to get involved in the family's financial decisions were brushed aside. She had confided in close friends about her concerns, revealing that she felt increasingly isolated from Richard, who had become more secretive and controlling. But what shocked the investigators the most was the discovery that Emily had been quietly investigating these financial irregularities for months before her disappearance. She had hired a private investigator to look into Richard's business affairs, suspecting that his empire was built on more than just hard work. The private investigator had uncovered evidence of illegal activities, money laundering, tax evasion, and shady connections to international crime syndicates. Emily had been gathering the evidence to confront Richard and potentially expose the truth. Could her disappearance be tied to her imminent discovery of Richard's criminal activities? Was she removed from the picture to protect the family's wealth and keep the empire intact? The authorities were now faced with an even more troubling question. Did Richard's involvement in these illegal activities play a role in his wife's vanishing, or had Ava's manipulations been the final spark that ignited this dangerous game? The investigation had now expanded beyond a simple case of infidelity. It was a deep dive into the corrupt world that Richard had built, a world that may have been more willing to kill to protect its secrets than anyone could have ever imagined. The weeks turned into months. The search for Emily Hartley continued, but with each passing day, hope began to fade. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, private investigators, and countless volunteers, no new leads emerged. The search areas expanded from the Hartley estate to the surrounding countryside, but there was no sign of Emily. No trace of where she could have gone or what had happened to her. The investigation felt like a labyrinth with no clear way out. Richard's public pleas for his wife's safe return became increasingly desperate, yet his statements began to sound more rehearsed, as though he were reading from a script. Meanwhile, as investigators focused on Richard and Ava, they began to notice something disturbing. Richard had begun to distance himself from the search. He made fewer public appearances and refused to cooperate fully with the police. His lack of involvement in the search and his vague responses to questions only fueled growing suspicions that he was hiding something. His behavior, once seen as that of a grieving husband, now seemed more like that of a man with something to hide. But what could he be hiding? Was he involved in his wife's disappearance, or was he just the victim of an unforeseen tragedy? The media, once sympathetic to Richard, turned against him. Articles questioning his character and motives became more frequent, and public opinion shifted. Accusations began to fly. Some believed Richard was guilty of something much darker than anyone had anticipated. His connection to Ava and the web of lies and deceit that had been uncovered painted a picture of a man who was capable of far more than anyone had originally thought. The pressure mounted as public interest in the case reached a fever pitch. No concrete evidence to charge Richard, the investigation seemed to stall. Emily's family was devastated, struggling to make sense of the unanswered questions. They wondered if their daughter's disappearance had been part of a larger scheme to protect Richard's fortune, or if something even more sinister had occurred. As time went on, the hope of finding Emily alive began to dwindle. But the investigation was far from over. The truth, it seemed, was still lurking just out of reach, hidden behind layers of manipulation, lies, and deceit. The more investigators delved into Ava Daniels' background, the more it became apparent that she had been playing a far larger role in Emily's disappearance than anyone had previously suspected. Her calm demeanor and charm, which had once made her the perfect mistress, were now seen as tools of manipulation in a twisted scheme that went far beyond an affair. Ava was not just a jealous lover, she had been an integral part of a carefully crafted plan, one designed to destabilize Richard's life and gain control over everything he had built. As detectives pieced together the timeline, they uncovered an unsettling pattern. Ava had been the one to push Richard further away from Emily in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. She had planted seeds of doubt in his mind, using their affair as leverage, subtly manipulating his emotions and fueling the tensions between him and his wife. Ava knew exactly what buttons to push to drive a wedge between them, all while making Richard believe that Emily was simply becoming more distant on her own. This emotional manipulation had set the stage for the final act. It was discovered that Ava had made several phone calls to Daniel Mercer, the disgraced former business associate who had been working with her on the plot. The two had been in constant communication, orchestrating the final details of their plan. Ava had fed Daniel information about Emily's movements, her fears, and her vulnerabilities, painting a perfect picture of a woman on the edge, one whose disappearance could be easily explained away. But as the investigation continued, the cracks in Ava's story began to show. Evidence pointed to the fact that she had been more than just a passive participant. She had actively worked to make Emily's disappearance seem like a voluntary escape. Her manipulations were so well executed that even Richard had believed, at first, that his wife had left him willingly. But as the pieces fell into place, it became clear that Ava had played a key role in this intricate, dangerous game. What had begun as an affair had turned into a dark conspiracy, and Ava's true motivations were finally coming to light. The authorities now had to figure out just how far Ava had gone and whether she was the mastermind behind everything that had happened to Emily. As the investigation reached its climax, the truth behind Emily Hartley's disappearance was finally revealed, and it was darker than anyone had ever imagined. Ava Daniels, once seen as just a jealous mistress, was unmasked. As the mastermind behind a complex and deadly plot, she had been involved in a well-orchestrated scheme to take everything from Emily, from her husband to her wealth and ultimately her life. The web of lies and betrayal spun by Ava was far deeper than anyone had realized. What had initially appeared to be an affair turned out to be the first step in a larger plan, one that involved manipulation, deceit, and a chilling desire for power. Ava's relationship with Daniel Mercer had been more than just an affair. It was a partnership built on revenge and greed. Daniel, embittered by his fall from grace due to Richard's actions years earlier, had long been plotting against the Hartleys. Ava, driven by jealousy and a thirst for the life Emily had become his ally in this dark scheme. Together, they carefully planted the seeds of Emily's disappearance. They knew that by manipulating Richard's emotions and distorting his perception of his wife, they could easily frame her vanishing as a voluntary escape, without anyone suspecting foul play. The ultimate shock came when Emily's body was found, in a remote area, hidden from the world in a place that only someone with intimate knowledge of the surroundings could have known. Investigators learned that Emily had been murdered, not by Richard, but by Ava, who had taken matters into her own hands when things began to spiral out of control. Emily's pregnancy had been a part of the plan, with Ava's jealousy pushing her to take drastic, violent action to ensure that her grip on Richard and his fortune would never be threatened. Richard, devastated and confused, had been manipulated from the beginning. His affair with Ava had clouded his judgment, and when Emily disappeared, he became the perfect pawn in a game he didn't understand. He was arrested, not for the murder, but for his role in covering up the truth and allowing Ava's manipulation to go unchecked. As the investigation closed, the truth was exposed. Ava had orchestrated the entire situation, using Richard and Emily as pieces in her own twisted game for power and control. In the end, Ava vanished. She disappeared from the public eye as swiftly as she had entered it, leaving only destruction and heartbreak in her wake. The case was closed, but the shadows of betrayal, manipulation, and murder would continue to haunt those who had been left behind. The mystery of Emily Hartley's disappearance had finally been solved, but the lingering questions about Ava's true nature would never be forgotten.